For 40 years, I've walked the line between worlds and am well versed in death. But I want to have faith in humans. Give me something to believe in. Earth below me, sky above me, fire within me. Brought to you by UPRN Network. I'm Trish Moe, and this is The Missing Piece. Good evening. Welcome to The Missing Piece. I'm your host, Trish, and we are broadcasting live on New Orleans 105.3 FM and United Public Radio Network. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Our first hour is sponsored by Carnation. Thank you, Carnation. So exciting news this week to announce real quick. The Missing Piece is going to be a 2-hour show now. So the first hour, of course, will be with a guest, and then the second, I'm going to be doing a lot of in the upcoming weeks and the next season. I have a lot of great ideas for things to happen in the second hour, and so stay tuned after 9 o'clock when I would usually end. We've got another hour. So I also have an announcement to make at the end of the show. Stay tuned for that. I'm going to be talking about the rule of three. And with that, Naomi Judd, Project Naomi, and the Naomi Project. So stay tuned for that. But most importantly, I am so excited that we finally got to I almost, if y'all can hear storms in the background, I'm in Kansas, so we are in the middle of some thunderstorms, and we've had some really bad tornadoes lately. So I apologize about that. Last week we had to postpone. Ray is my guest this week. I would like to welcome Ray Bishop on my show. I'm so excited about this. Ray was known formerly as the most wanted man in the UK. Highly intelligent, extraordinary photographic memory, gifted writer, not afraid of the truth, and that is exactly what this show is about. So he has his master's degree in psychology, diploma in drug and alcohol counseling, and is here to talk about his book Outlaw, as well as his story of transformation and reform. So welcome, Ray. It's very nice to meet you. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for coming at is it 2:30 a.m.?
Yes, about 2:30 a.m. in the morning here in the UK.
Yes.
Can I first start by saying, but please, God be with everyone in Kansas tonight, and I hope you're all safe in the storms. You know, when you guys get it bad, then I mean, we get a tiny little bit of rain in the UK, and the country comes to a standstill. But what you guys have to endure, and I just pray that everyone's safe.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, my thoughts go out to everyone in Andover. That's about 30 miles from me, actually, that hit this weekend. They had a very, very bad, I'm not sure what it was categorized, F4 maybe, tornado that just
pray everyone's safe. Yeah.
So Ray, I'm so excited to meet you. I have made it through. I keep rereading parts of your book, for that matter.
Thank you.
But just to kind of understand it. But I want to hear your point of view. Tell us your story, where it all began.
Well, first and foremost, the one thing I do always state today is that I am a great reformist, and it's not how we start out in life, it's how we end up that really matters. And I'm ashamed of my past. I didn't live a good past, with, I don't know if having the most wanted man is a good monarch or whatever, but it's today I'm a great reformist. I try to carry a message of hope. Most importantly, I do a lot to try and deter youngsters away from this way of life. We have a very big problem in this country at the moment with knife crime, especially the young males. And
Knife?
I don't know if knife crime. I don't know
wow.
if you. I mean, every day teens stabbing teens. I mean,
Wow,
London,
that's
it's at
interesting.
pandemic levels. Our murder rate in London now is much higher than New York. I mean, you can actually check this. So I'm involved with a charity called Put Down Your Knife, Change Your Life. I do a lot of good stuff,
Put
but
down your knife, change your life.
yeah, I mean, obviously to get that monarch, yeah, I did live a very bad life in the past. I was involved in organised crime and a figure in what you would call London's gangland underworld. Um, spent a large period of my life incarcerated in prison. So I spent 16 years of my life in prison. A lot of that in maximum security conditions, because the most wanted part came from I actually escaped from custody when I was arrested. I was involved in organised crime in both the UK and Europe, and when I was arrested in Europe and extradited back to the UK, I then went on to break out of custody, and that was the period that I was labelled the most wanted man. But um, it wasn't like how do I say it? I wasn't a serial killer or anything like that. First and
Right.
foremost, I'm not justifying anything what I did do, but I was involved in the importation of drugs and armed robbery and lots of different things. And it was a terrible life I lived, and I have a lot of regret today.
But you've made it a long way. I mean, you've come a long way as far as changing your life. What talk about so what led to that and what's important for listeners to know? There were a lot of things that you go over in your book that led up to that lifestyle, as far as your younger years, I guess. Um,
Yeah.
what I know, there might not be a lot of people in the US familiar with, everybody's heard the same stories about all of the American um, people that have been involved in organized crime and stuff. But I'm trying to branch out and make, worldwide, kind of bridge that gap between countries. So
Well, I suppose it's no different in terms of. I mean, I know you guys in America. I know we have gangsters in this country and
mhm,
organised crime. We have a problem the same as obviously yourselves have had there. I mean, with in the States, it's obviously been predominantly with the sort of family orientated stuff, which is like the mafias and whatever else. I mean, we all hear about them and them guys. But in this country, what we had. Crime is labelled organised crime. It's labelled the underworld, you know,
right.
and the London underworld predominantly is London being the capital of the UK. It's the epicenter, and I know that sometimes in the States that people can sort of think, well, England it's only such a small little place or whatever, but there's 70 odd million people live in the UK, and we are quite densely packed, and organised crime in this country is labelled the underworld. And a fascinating fact for your listeners, which you may or may not find interesting, the term underworld, I don't know, is that a term you're familiar with in the States for crime? And do they use the underworld? And
Uh, yes. But people refer to that specific definition is kind of it's kind of a very broad umbrella term for many different underworld things. There's the dark web and the the
yeah,
the dark government
well,
and
in
um
the UK, the underworld refers to organised crime, and the actual term "the underworld" is a Victorian term. It comes from Victorian London, and what
wow.
it refers to is London was the first country in the world to have an underground sewage system. They built the sewers, etc. And parts of London were quite impoverished. And occasionally the rich would come over to South London, which is where I'm from, which was predominantly the sort of ghetto area of London in Victorian times. Occasionally they would come over there because that's where the gin palaces were and the brothels, etc. And occasionally the rich and wealthy, they might drop a crown or two and it would wash into the sewer system. So the impoverished would tend to live in the sewer system throughout the day, looking for crowns and things that the rich people had dropped. And that's why if someone got mugged or something in Victorian Britain, they said, oh, it was someone from the underworld, referring to people that were in the sewers. So that's where
Oh,
the broad term underworld comes from. But it's used very generic in the world today, underworld, referring to organised crime, etc., etc.
right.
That's where the term actually comes from. So it's like with all semantics, with all words, they have a meaning somewhere, and it comes from
Absolutely.
Victorian Britain. But I mean, I would say the link for us was definitely, and I don't make excuses for the bad choices I've made, because I know a lot of people come out of extreme hardship and didn't live the life I lived. But poverty was a big factor, in London, as in all cities. I know you've got it in your cities, like you
Absolutely.
would call them ghettos, like in certain parts of New York, which are super affluent. And then you would have your downtown Brooklyns and Harlems, which were predominantly impoverished. And the part of South London, which I come for, was quite impoverished, and as a young man, it was very difficult times to sort of find your place. We were in the depths of recession. We were under Margaret Thatcher, a Conservative government, and predominantly, like we are witnessing now, when we're ruled by a Conservative government, it tends to be the rich get richer and the poor get poorer and get forgot, and that's very much how it was for us. And it was quite a very tough era for me to grow up in. I grew up in a army town, which was Woolwich. We were targeted quite frequently by paramilitary organisations. The IRA bombed my part of London
Oh,
3 or 4
just got
times.
chills.
So
Man,
it, it,
that's um that's something that is hard for, in the US, we, as a country, we've sent soldiers and been involved in conflicts and such, over the past, but it hasn't necessarily been on our homeland, in our own backyard, um, for a very long time, and so I think that's something that is hard for people to relate to here, to even imagine, in the last um, 20, 30 years, as far as yes, we've had terrorist attacks and things like that, but I mean, in actual homeland war or conflict.
well, when
Um,
I grew up, it was, I mean, in the early 70s and 80s, Britain technically was at war with one half of itself, being the north of Ireland. So we was
mhm,
always under the threat in London of IRA terror attacks. Now, the reason why I say this is because my mum was of Irish Catholic descent. She was an Irish immigrant, and like London being a massive Irish immigrant. And I suppose we were pretty much similar to like what you were in the States, with certain ethnic groups or whatever would
mhm.
tend to congregate in certain areas. And my part of London, there was quite a lot of Irish, and we were on the receiving end of quite a lot of prejudice because of being Irish Catholic descent and all that. And just for the record, my granddad, here's another fascinating story for you, which I actually say in the book. My granddad was actually from New York, and my
Oh, wow.
granddad, that's my mother's father. My mother's father won the New York State Lottery in 1930 something, and this is why I
Really?
say I owe my life to Hitler. I know that's a broad statement, but what actually happened is in the 1930s, my granddad worked at Macy's in New York for 18 years. He won the New York State
Wow.
Lottery back in the 1930s, which was a hell of a lot of money. And what he
I'm
done is
sure.
he was the son of an Irish immigrant during the potato famine to America. Anyway, he flew back well, he got a boat or whatever back to Ireland in 1937, 38 to trace his family roots and look after some of his family. And he bought his distant cousin a farm, whatever else. Cut a long story short, the Second World War started. He couldn't get back to America. He met my nan and resettled in Ireland, and the rest is history. So I am of actually semi-American descent, and I do have quite a
Wow.
lot of American relatives, yeah, in New York and in I've got quite a lot
That's
of relatives out there,
crazy.
but I've never been allowed to go, which is one of my
Oh,
biggest regrets. I've been refused entry to the States twice. I tried to get into the States to come to visit, once to go to a convention and once to see family, and I was refused entry.
Why, if you don't mind me, I mean, you don't have to say on air if you don't want
Because
to.
of my, and I'm ashamed to say it, my organised crime links. I have a conviction for
Huh.
firearms offences. I have a conviction for smuggling in Europe. I was actually banned from holding a UK passport for 10 years. One of only two people in the country to have been banned from holding a UK passport because of offences I committed whilst in France, importations into the UK, etc. And yeah, I was refused entry.
That's interesting. I thought I haven't researched it in a while, and I'm sure it might be different now. Um, but I thought the U.S. was pretty lenient in certain states. In certain states, um, they they used to have different rules and regulations based on that sort of thing. So
You
that's actually
can
really surprising.
Well, you can appeal, but I think it goes down to as well time spent. And I mean, I've not been in trouble now with the police for a long time. You know, my life is totally different today, first and foremost.
Hmm.
I think as time goes on, I do have friends that have been allowed entry, but America is very strict, and it seems to be very strict for it seems to be more strict for UK citizens at times than it does for
Well,
other nations. It's
so
like,
well,
and
yeah.
we've got
So
close relations. I just don't get it.
that's what I was gonna say. I thought we let everybody, like, I'm surprised. I thought we let everybody in, and that's not being completely positive, you know?
Well, perhaps it was in response at the time to there was a large contingent of UK people who didn't want to admit Donald Trump, you know, and I mean
Oh,
I'm not have
yes.
any political affiliations in any shape or form, but what I will say is I'm a scaffolder. I run a scaffold business now, and I was actually scaffolding a building in London when Mr. Trump was here, and they flew over us in about 6 helicopters one day. Like, and I thought, well, at least I got to see Trump as even though he was only in a helicopter.
Yes, there were that was such a mixed up time, for the US. One of our, listeners said you should do an episode on Bishop's Lane. I'm not familiar with Bishop's Lane. I don't know if you know what that is.
I don't know.
I don't know what that is either, Gail. So, um, but what so you had the hardships of your own country being in conflict growing up, and then as a your mom and dad met. Now your dad, though, was he always around? Was that
No, see, this is another thing. My dad actually died when I was quite young.
okay?
My dad had a severe drink problem, which added to the sort of like impoverished nature. My mother had come here from Ireland as a young woman, and you know, I'm one of five, so she had five siblings, and when she split up with my father, obviously times are very hard growing up with a single parent. You know, my mother done the best she could, of course she could, but we didn't have. There was no silver spoon in my mouth, and that's not to
Mhm.
make excuses. It really isn't. But as a young child, you know, when you're hungry, sometimes, I started to steal at a young age, like shoplift and little minor petty crime. And as bad as that sounds, at the time, sometimes I went to school when I was hungry, and I might steal something. And with that comes water finds its own level. And from a young age, I was looking and searching to be a part of something. We was all in that same position on my estate where I grew up in. If you think of, I refer to estates. Now, estates would be no different than your housing projects. I know, like sometimes you hear the term
And
estate, people think,
projects.
oh, a big, lovely country pile.
I would have.
An estate is what it actually means is like social housing, like your
Okay.
projects,
Our
like
projects, yeah.
estates.
Section
And
8
if you've
here.
got an estate with a lot of impoverished children in a similar position, and we're all fighting for survival, it's a tough way to grow up. It's easy to get led astray. It's easy to sort of, you lose yourself in that, in the
Mhm.
quest to belong, and you're searching for father figures. And I think for me, that came in the form of the older generation and the criminals. And we had a lot of armed robbers in my area. It was known as Bandit Country, the part of South London I'm from.
Wow.
That's what it was known as, bandit country, because we had a lot of armed robbers in the 80s. What we had is a lot of people from my state used to rob cash in transit robberies, security vans, etc. We used to look up to these people because they had money, an aura, a wealth about them, and it was tough times. It culminated. I mean, we got involved in armed robberies when we were pretty young, and it culminated in the armed robbery rate in London at the time in the 80s had skyrocketed, gone so high. And we had a Home Secretary at the time called Douglas Hurd. And although they'll never admit it, there was a shoot to kill policy, basically to bring down the armed robbery rate. And two of my friends got shot dead. And the third friend, as he was turning to run to get to the getaway vehicle, the police shot him in the back. I mean,
Wow.
that tells you that it was a shoot to kill policy. It was execution, and he ran to get in the getaway car. They shot him. Luckily, he survived. Two of my friends died. And yeah, so that pushed us into other sorts of crimes. And that's how we got into the smuggling world and whatever else.
And I can definitely relate to that. I'm a single mom and I live in a very Topeka is one of the most has become per capita very, very dangerous. And what's scary, as single parents, we try to a lot of times we can't help heal the abandonment issues and things like that, for especially our sons. But um I try to keep very involved in his life, and knowing about his friends who he hangs out with, um but also trying to get him interested in sports and activities that keep kids off the streets, and it, but it's scary to me that how quickly things like that progress, because I grew up in before I moved to Kansas. When I was younger, I grew up in a very, very dangerous city as well. And so I don't want to become numb to I mean, every night there's like shootings in my alley. And more, I become numb to, five gunshots went off very close last night to me, and I didn't even flinch. And it's scary when you get to that point,
It becomes
because you're so
sanitized,
used to
doesn't
it.
it? Yeah, but
Um,
well, single mothers and single fathers, they're the real heroes of this world. And there's no script for it. You do the best you can. But what I can say as an adult now with hindsight is I wish somebody would have sat me down and asked how I felt, because I lost myself as a young man. I didn't, and it
yeah,
was almost like, if I can't tell you how I feel, I'll show you how I feel. And all them things that you so eloquently said, abandonment issues and all that sort of stuff, it taps into esteem. And if you've got a low self-esteem, but you don't know that
hmm,
you have that, then you're vulnerable to be pulled in all sorts of directions. And that's how it was for me, very
yeah,
much so. I wish, I've often said to myself, what would I say to a young me? What would I say? And it's like I felt like I'd been dropped from a spaceship. And when I left school, it was tough times. There was not a lot of jobs. We were tarred with a certain brush because of where we came from. And I did try to go. There was not options to go to college and university and all these things, because there wasn't grants and things available back then.
right,
There was no bank of mum and dad. These were not options for us. So I did try to get work. I tried to get a job. And it was very difficult. As soon as you said where you were from, it's almost like you were tarred with that brush. And then the police tarred us with that brush.
hmm,
Margaret Thatcher in the late 80s, her way of dealing with the inner city problems was build more prisons. That was the Conservative way. It was build more prisons and fill them up. It's very much an industry
hmm,
prison. It's an industry.
yeah,
When you think about everything that comes off the back of that, of all the jobs that come off of it, securities, probations, the police, the courts, everything, and all
yeah,
some high end people earn quite substantially out of crime. And Karl Marx said it beautifully. He said, if you want to judge any society, look no further than its prisons. And what I can tell you from the period I spent in prison, I pretty much grew up in establishments and spent 16 years in prison. I've met some of the most talented, gifted, intelligent people that you would ever meet in prison. They just didn't come from the right way of life. Their
right.
faith didn't fit. Does that make sense?
And
It's
that's
like, Yeah,
Well,
it's
that's how
easy
I
to
found
just
you and like Linda Calvi and people like that, that
great people.
absolutely. There's artists and singers and brilliant scientists and stuff that
Well, it
have been
depends.
in
I mean,
prison.
to not justify what I've done, I mean, no crime is victimless. But when you see how some of the politicians and people go on in the world, especially in this country,
Yes.
to us, it's called, if we fiddled our tax or something like that, it's called theft. If they fiddle their
Mm,
expense accounts, it's called a minor discrepancy. And we've
right.
got, we have politicians here blatantly breaking the law left, right, and centre. You've probably seen it on so it's it's a very grey area, this whole crime
We
criminality
tend to have
debate.
that in the US as well.
Yeah. But I like to say, one thing I do like to say is leopards do change their spots. And the reason why I'm so I speak out very much so is because there's not enough people that have given a voice, that have lived the life I've lived, that have gone on to basically reform themselves and do good things in society. There's not enough, and it does show people there's a way out, because I don't think anyone is truly criminal unless you're mentally ill. In the times, like I say, I've spent in prison, no one wants to be there. Everyone wants a better life and they don't want to be doing the things they're doing. But through circumstance sometimes and bad choices, they've ended up that way,
Hmm.
and if there's a bit more effort spent in trying to support people and help people, no one's beyond reproach, no one's beyond redemption.
No, absolutely. I always go by the saying, um, every saint has a past, every sinner has a future.
Most definitely.
Um,
Most definitely. I mean, if you're of a religious disposition, I mean, Jesus Christ said it beautifully himself about there is never such a rejoice as one sinner that reforms in heaven, is there? It's, and we can all change.
do you think that the world now, for that matter, is starting to kind of realize this and um, go more, err on the side of people being human and understanding that and kind of um, trying to understand the underdogs more? Have
I
you
think
felt
so.
that in the last few years?
Very much so. I think we're in a sort of, without trying to sound philosophical, I think we're in an age of awakening of spirit. I think a lot
Mm.
of people are waking up. They're actually waking up to the world and the way of the world and what's actually in control of the world. Dark forces control this world.
Oh,
We've got
absolutely.
wars all over the world and whatever else. And for what? When you break it all down into a nutshell, it's I mean, the way that certain people are behaving now in Ukraine and whatever else, and you think, it's easy to judge people like me sometimes, and who live that bad life, and it's nice when you're on the molehill and you can look down, because everyone needs their villain, don't they? But it's everyone
I
needs the bad
think,
guy, I suppose, don't they?
but everybody's, there's always two sides to every story. And I think, you said every villain's the bad guy. And that's absolutely true. Everyone is a villain in someone's story,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
100% of the time. But I think what people are coming to understand is most often the villain was actually the catalyst for change.
yeah. Yeah, well, new paradigms happened after the Second World War, didn't they? If we had no Second World War, man would have never walked
Hmm.
on the moon. It's
Yeah.
all, we're not in control of it. And I think the one thing I've learned is you can only ever change your own corner of the world. And if everyone had that same mindset, wouldn't the world be a lovely place?
And I was discussing, Beltane. I'm pagan, so and I have my Irish roots and stuff. And since that was yesterday and the fire festivals, um, it's kind of symbolic to me. As far as people like yourself spreading a message, um, it takes one, and uh, when you have a lot of sparks, a lot of small fires create one big fire, right? In a
Mm.
positive note. And I was talking about how there's certain plants, eucalyptus, certain pine species that are fire activated. Their seeds are. So quite literally, they they don't grow unless they catch on fire. So
Mm.
the forest actually has to catch on fire for it to grow. And a lot of people don't realize that, but that's symbolic of people too. Sometimes we don't, you're talking about generations of poverty and crime and being victims of circumstances as children. Um,
I mean, it's getting worse. I mean, I predict a pandemic in this country because people are having it extremely hard, and I know that people in your own country are too. So I really identify with them. But we have a massive fuel crisis here at the minute, obviously because we're an island. We tend to import most
mhm,
of our stuff, and the price of fuel is well, I mean, we're the dearest in Europe for petrol and things like that at the pumps, but in terms of gas and things for heating homes, I mean, it's people's bills have doubled. And
mhm.
and there's a lot of single
Yeah,
parents and in this country and whatever else on like I suppose you would call it welfare and whatever if they can't work because they've got small children or whatever, and they're really really struggling. We have food banks and everything in this country. I mean, I know people seem to think that England and the UK is this wonderful affluent city and the world leader in financial institutions and all that. That's what they like to portray, obviously to attract business and everything else. But it's the divide is becoming so big in this country now. You have the wealthy and super wealthy, and things are becoming unattainable. Property prices, all these things. And what we have now is we have a generation of young people now that I would say are bordering on mentally ill. We have very high suicide rates amongst young people, which they don't like to tell you about. We have the
yeah,
knife crime pandemic amongst young people. And it's quick to just say, oh, it's about drugs and it's about gangs and all this. It's about poverty in a nutshell, and it's about lack of opportunities, and it's about things becoming basic hierarchy of needs becoming unobtainable. Young people can't leave home, and if they don't have wealthy parents, they can't afford to leave home. They can't afford the rents, and they know that their only choice now is, be it in the words of your great 50 Cent, get rich or die trying. And that's what we're
yeah.
getting now. It's becoming, I mean, we are becoming in the UK like, pretty much like what you would be in best way I could describe it now in London, particularly, is like what you would have in like downtown LA. We have serious gang problems here, serious gang problems. And because we don't have ready access to firearms, although they're here and people do get shot or whatever else, it tends to be knives. And it's epidemic
That's
levels.
still really interesting to me that it's going back almost, medieval times
Very
type
much so.
hand to hand combat, which brings up another interesting, one of the first things I noticed about you was your history of boxing, right?
Yeah, I was a fighter. I was a boxer.
Yes, how did you get in? I mean, I was a boxer as well, and
I don't want no
how
trouble.
did you how did you get into that? Was that another outlet, I guess, for
I,
your
I, I was very fortunate in terms of the school I went to when I was young had a boxing academy there overnight, quite a famous one called St. Peter's ABC, and I went to St. Peter's primary school. And because it had a boxing academy, I was already displaying signs as a young man of having, let's say, behavioural problems. I suppose in today's world, I think we're too quick to label kids, but I think if I'd have been a child today, they would have labelled me ADHD or something. But I'm not a fan of labels, but I think that's what they would have labelled me because I was very hypo, very sort of impulsive, and all these things. And one of the teachers at the school, it was the actual caretaker, fantastic man. He recognised in me and a few of the other lads, and he said, "Right, you need to come boxing." So we actually started boxing when we were young in primary school, and it was something I loved, and I just took to it. And I become very good at it. And later on in life, after the problems I'd had, and I went back into boxing, I couldn't become a licensed fighter, so I actually boxed unlicensed, and I became a British unlicensed boxing champion, which was because we have a big unlicensed
Wow.
circuit here. So
Yes.
I achieved the best I could have achieved. I'm not saying I was a Canelo or a Mayweather, but I achieved the best I could have achieved, and I managed to do that in amongst all my madness. But yeah. And I think it's a great thing. We used to do boxing in schools here when I was a kid, and if I had my way, I'd bring it back into schools because I don't see it as violence. I see it as a sport. It teaches discipline. It teaches respect. It teaches all them things.
Absolutely.
It's very, very good very good for young men and young women. There's some
Oh, yeah.
fantastic female boxers out there at the moment. And Katie Taylor the other night, bless her. There's some. It's for all.
I went from boxing to roller derby, and I mean, I would still be doing that if I got very injured around when I was almost 40. So, so, but yes,
You don't look that
absolutely.
old now. You must have had a good life.
No, it's my witch genes.
But you would know then, you would relate if you was a boxer. It teaches you things. It teaches you about yourself.
Mm,
And the one thing it taught me is, as much as the life I've lived, and yes, I freely admit, I lived a violent past or whatever else, but I was never a bully or anything like that. And I didn't, yes, I did get involved in things that I regret, violent crime, and in that world, it is a violent world. But the thing is, for me, I was very much in conflict with myself. It's a very, very gentle nature to me. I'm actually involved in animal charities today. I love animals. I have a very soft side to me, and I lost that in amongst all that crime and criminality and the violence that comes with it and the territorial aspect. When you're involved in gangland, there's always someone trying to take over or rob you, and it's just you become so lost in it all and so immersed,
yes,
and you're in such conflict with yourself, and
it's and people don't realize that. I saw a YouTube video where a girl, I think it was in LA or somewhere, was ducking at a gas pump because there was a drive-by, somebody shooting. And everybody commented that were from other places in the US or the world, that was a staged video. And I was thinking, well, that could easily happen in my neighborhood, and I would probably continue pumping gas and duck. And not, people were commenting, why didn't she leave? Why didn't she do that? Well,
but
because it's our life, it's our day-to-day life.
it,
It's
it depends where you come from, doesn't it? And it becomes sanitized. I mean, somebody who lives in
yes.
like upstate Manhattan or something like that would probably not be privy to it. I mean,
Oh, they
like
might pass out.
how many
So,
people can say they know? I mean, in my own life, for example, I probably know 20, 30 people who have died from drug addiction because
yeah.
poverty brings that as well. And, a lot of my friends who didn't go into crime and criminality went into a lot. I mean, crime and criminality, I see it as a form of self-harm and self-destruct anyway. And a lot of people went into drugs and whatever else and died from drug addiction. I also have 7 or 8 friends that have been murdered. And I actually have 4 friends that have been shot dead by the police. And I mean, that sort of tells you sort of where I come from. And I mean, I know that might be the norm for someone who's, say, from Compton or Oakwood in LA or something, or other parts of America that have had them sort of problems. But we have them problems here too. It's just not public. It's the norm here. You become hardened to it. You become sort of like, they sanitize death on the movies and whatever else, and you watch a film and everyone gets killed and no one bats an eyelid. It becomes like that in your
Yeah.
area. It doesn't shock anymore, does it?
No. Um,
Which is quite sad. It's quite
it,
sad
it is
because
sad.
if we're like that as adults, what is it like for the youngsters growing up amongst that?
Mhm.
And I think fear is it's a great plague, and it goes on to cause so many problems in life. I think if you was to ask me how I truly felt as a child, scared would be the word, scared. But I couldn't display that, and I couldn't display fear, and it manifested itself in other ways for me. But how are these youngsters feeling now, especially in the UK when they're going to school and they're having to worry about these bloody gangs stabbing them and whatever else. And we are talking about school kids
Yeah.
stabbing school kids, you know?
There were, my school had metal detectors, and this was in the early 90s,
Yeah,
before all these school shootings in higher class, middle class neighborhoods,
yeah.
things like that in the US. People didn't even know that this went on. It's like we were in our own little world. There were kids dying on my playground. We had
Oh,
armed security guards on every hallway. We had drug dogs come in and search lockers a few times a week. That was normal. And I was friends with gang members. Um, I would say acquaintances for protection
yeah.
because I grew up in southwestern New Mexico, and so I was one of few. I was the minority there. I was the redheaded Irish girl in a class of 700, and I was probably one of maybe, I don't know, very small number of white students for that matter. So
Well, I mean, it is. I mean, you live in a country which is like, I mean, I don't know a lot about, but I know in certain states they are gun states, aren't they? I mean, guns are
mhm,
freely owned and freely
yes,
whatever. And I know there's obviously no doubt a lot of responsible people that own them, but there is the irresponsible minority. And if people are mentally ill, the
hmm
one thing I say about firearms, and I'm somebody who committed armed robberies and whatever else, you may think you're in control of that gun, but you are not. That gun is in control of you. And in the right situation, anybody can kill anybody. They really can. And we see that in
yeah,
war and conflict all the time. People that would never in a million years kill people. I mean, you've only got to look at the history of the Second World War. I mean, the German people and all the other nations. I mean, they had to go and kill or be killed or whatever. And if
hmm
you put too many guns in a society, it's I'm quite glad that we don't have a free and open gun policy in this country. People do have firearms, don't they? But it's
At the same
you know,
time, here, they used to have a concealed carry license requirement, and then they have open carry. But more often than not, I mean, obviously, there's a pretty strict um, background check to own a gun and to get
well, I suppose
but
they're okay if they're in the hands of the good guys. It's
well,
when they're in the hands
what
of the bad
happens
guys.
when I see somebody openly carrying like that, um, that doesn't scare me as much because usually they're the ones, if somebody comes in threatening other people who are illegally carrying a weapon, they're the ones that kind of defend the people who don't have weapons. So not always, but sometimes. I don't know. It's a whole.
Which is what I mean. In this country, there's always the ongoing debate about the about capital punishment, because I mean it was abolished
Mhm.
here, as you know, in 1968, I think it was. And I know you have it in your country, don't you, where you still have capital punishment in some states, don't you? And
Yeah.
it doesn't act as a deterrent, because I
No.
believe by virtue of most violent crime, most people when they commit violent crime, I don't want to label everyone, but in that moment when they commit it, they're either mentally ill or behaviorally ill, spiritually ill, or emotionally ill.
hmm
Because human beings, we've all got that capacity, but we've also got the capacity to walk away or make a better choice or whatever. So it doesn't act as a deterrent, does it? So it's like a firearm. You could say, does a firearm act as a deterrent to stop someone coming to do something? Not really. They just go and arm themselves, don't they? Does a nuclear bomb act as a deterrent? Not really. The other country just goes, well, I'll get a nuclear bomb. And it just
Yeah.
escalates and escalates and escalates, doesn't it?
And I think that's one of the things, everything that's being done is kind of building more prisons and doing this. That's
Yeah.
just that doesn't help anything for one. That's just kind of a band-aid
Well,
for
it's like,
the
we're heading
problem.
towards a place of one half of the country locking up the other half,
Right.
or
And so it's not getting to the root of the matter of what needs to be healed. And that's the war within ourselves first.
yeah. And I
And
think
that's
I know the states, and I know parts of the states, and I've looked into this because I've done research in this for another book that I'm writing, and I actually took part in a book on reform with a Harvard professor two years ago. He's wrote a book and I was one of his subjects, and I contributed to that, and I actually done my own bit of research. And America has some of the harshest sentencing, as you know, like and the UK, in the whole of Europe, we have some of the harshest sentencing too. We have things like, you get life without parole in your country. We have that here too. We have people doing whole life terms and whatever else. And sometimes, yes, I agree, they need that. But then also, um, you can get phenomenal sentences in this country for certain crimes where you would say, do they really need to be doing that long? What is it that we are actually achieving by sentencing someone to say, someone
Oh,
who goes out in poverty and commits a robbery, okay, they deserve to be sentenced. But I have friends doing 25 years for one robbery. One
yeah.
robbery. 25 years. And in this country, a 25-year sentence, you don't get halfway parole or do 5 years or 10 years and get out like some things you do in America. If you get 25-year sentence in this country, the minimum term you will serve out of that 25 years is 2/3. So you will not be considered for release till you've done 16, 17 years.
Oh.
So, I've
And
got
they
a
do
few friends like that.
they do have that here. I have had a friend a long time ago that um this was before, so now marijuana has become legal in quite a few states, but before it was, I have friends that in the past that went to maximum security prison for being caught with, an ounce of marijuana or something ridiculous,
Crazy.
which is now legal in those same places they were arrested. And that held a harsher prison sentence than some rapes and murders,
Well,
which
that's
to me,
wrong.
I'm like,
That's wrong.
and
Well,
they
if
weren't, it's not even like people that were selling it or that, they were just caught in possession of, which is ridiculous.
Well, I think, I mean, in terms of, I know it's a whole new debate, and I know a lot of people perhaps wouldn't agree, but I'm in favour of decriminalisation of most drugs. And the reason
Yeah.
being is because they can be monitored, they can be taken out of the hands of the criminals, and the
Yes.
money generated can go into helping those with problems and
And they
drug
can tax it
addictions
too.
and
Yeah.
whatever else. And, people are going to take it. The fact that these
Yes,
substances are
absolutely.
illegal. My friend got arrested for a drug case once, and he got a long sentence. And he said to the judge, "I never sold drugs to anyone that didn't want to buy them." and
Yeah.
I get what he meant by that. And
Yeah.
I'm not throwing. I don't want to be too political here, but what I will say is someone who's grown up in amongst that and had problems with addiction myself in the past. I've seen that there has to be a better way just in criminalising people, especially addicts. And addicts, in a lot of circumstances, they're not well people. They're actually mentally ill. And the World Health
Right.
Organization recognises that addiction and alcoholism is actually a form of mental illness. It's an illness. They need treatment, not incarceration, not to be
Right.
penalised, not to go into the penal system and get no help and just fall deeper into themselves and come out and end up overdosing and dying, which is happens a lot here. People get released from prison with that have had drug problems. They go into prison, they've had a drug problem, they come out totally untreated, go back on the drugs, they've got no tolerance or whatever, they overdose and die. Happens a lot here. Because I do work with
Happens
ex
here
addicts,
too.
as you know,
Yeah.
with diploma in counselling. We have that a lot here. We fail them. We fail them. People that could be helped. Because the
I think
funds
the
are not there,
same
the
thing
money's not there.
here. But it shouldn't
Yeah,
it but it is. It is. There's people, here's the big thing to me, especially in a time with the internet when there's kids, and I tell my own kids, I tell other students things like this, because now is a time where humans are paying attention to other humans that aren't necessarily in the news, that aren't celebrities, real people. We're in a time where kids have the ability to influence millions of other people across the world.
yeah,
And they're not all using it in a smart manner. They could be doing so much more than teaching others how to eat Tide Pods, or you know what I mean?
yeah.
Like
Well, do you know
There's so
what we
many,
had?
or how to twerk or something. Like use that gift that you have to have a voice and spread a message for something good.
We had a massive problem here with because of the harsh penalties for drugs and whatever else. I mean, we have some of the harshest. It's been proved in Holland and places like that, other parts of Europe where they're a lot more liberal. They don't have the same problems we have, and as you know, with drugs and everything else, you get a load of social problems and crime and all this stuff. What we had here, because of the harsh penalties, we had a really bad problem with what was called new psychoactive substances. You know, these substances that were made artificially in China and places like that. And people were buying them on the internet because they were legal and they
Right.
mirrored the effect of normal drugs, say your
That's scary.
cocaines and everything else. And all the youngsters were taking them because they were legal. And no one knew what they were taking, and we had loads of young kids dying and all sorts with these different compounds of synthetic cannabis, for example, and whatever else, and they were bloody dying. You know, it's a travesty. Travesty.
I think, is that how you got, was there any specific time you can remember that, like a specific point where you got pulled into to the drugs and the influence? Do you remember a specific occasion when you were younger?
Well, I do. And it was again sort of peer pressure, you know, growing up on the estate, you know, having no money, having
Right.
few options and whatever else. And as a 15, 16-year old youngster, these things sort of introduced themselves and they seemed exciting. And, you know, you try a joint or have a drink or whatever. And I think for some of us, like you know, we found a little bit of escape. You know, we're trying
Hmm.
to escape from our environment, you know, and I know there's a whole debate about drugs, addiction, and all these things. Is it psychological? Is it spiritual? Is it mental? Is it that we are genetically predisposed to be that way or whatever? But having studied psychology, I look at the study with lab rats, and when they got the lab rats addicted to different drugs and they kept going back for the drugs, and as soon as they
Hmm.
introduced like all these lovely female rats into the cage and better food and all these things, the rats seem to wean themselves away from the drugs. So there is definitely links to your sort of environment and what you're exposed to. I know not everyone will go down that road, but for me it was very much about escape, and it was about filling a void. You know, all them emotions you highlighted, you know, the self-esteem and feeling ashamed and all that sort of stuff. You know, for me as a young man, I felt quite ashamed that from where I came from, if that makes sense, I was ashamed of my area because you would see the haves, we were the have-nots, so you didn't feel as good as them, but you didn't know that's how you felt at the time.
Right.
So you're searching and you're looking for ways to fill the void and the emptiness that you feel inside. And for me, it was very much just a spiral, and I spiraled in, and when I spiraled into crime and progressed to organised crime and all that, by the time I started to realise I don't want to be here, it was already too late. I was so heavily immersed in that world that you become totally lost, and it's almost like you're being driven by dark forces. You know, at one
Yes.
point I felt like I was just being totally controlled, and although I'm ashamed to admit, at the end of my criminality, before I found some sort of inner redemption, I was quite capable of pretty much anything, you know. And my life could have gone any way, you know. I could have killed, been killed, or spent the rest of my life behind bars, you know. I was lucky that it panned out the way it did for me, you know.
It's amazing that you've turned your life around in that manner. And yes, absolutely, I can relate because it it's not just uh the neighborhood, the the peers of kids. It's also, like you said, with your having a single mom, because we feel the guilt of that. For myself, we ended up here kind of by default during the shutdown because we were being kicked out of our house in a smaller community and a safer community with nowhere to go. And
Mm.
so but so as a mom, when we end up in those situations and we feel our kids, that's another conflict in itself. And even though parents try not to project that as well, it
Mm.
still becomes, because we feel guilty for putting our family here, they feel ashamed for living. And so while the mom's trying to get them out of that, you know what I mean? And it's a whole, like you said, it's a spiral. And then it spreads to the school. And then the teachers, eventually, you see how it just, everyone, the negativity and the downward spiral of that creates this giant, well, like a storm, like a tornado.
It
Um,
does. I mean, I'll relay this story to you, and this is the absolute truth. Honesty is a very integral part of my makeup today as a human being. And
yes.
the one thing I will relay is this story. Someone that I know quite well. He was a former criminal. He was actually a heroin addict, and his partner was what you would call, she was a prostitute, and they had a small, they had a daughter, and everyone was saying, you need to put her up for adoption, and they said no way, and they kept her, and the mum actually sadly died when she was like 9 years old, the girl. The dad sorted himself out, got off the heroin, raised the daughter. She's a top neurologist in a London hospital. She
Wow.
performs brain surgery on people, saving people's lives. And the reason why I say that is it doesn't matter where you come from. You never
No.
know where you're going to go. It's the same. It's the same thing with the abortion debate, isn't it? When they say to someone, if you knew a woman who was dying of syphilis, who
Mhm.
had two handicapped children, and she's a prostitute and she's living on the streets and she's just got pregnant again, would you say have an abortion? Most people would say yes, and the answer to
Yeah.
that is you just killed Beethoven. So
Right.
you never, it doesn't matter where you come from, does it? And I'm a very firm believer in the philosophy of that, because for me and the life I've lived and whatever else, to the good I do today and what I put into society, and that's not to come from any egotistical standpoint. I do a lot of good in society. I'm today. I'm quite a wealthy man. I run a very large scaffold company in this country. I employ people. I'm a successful author. I donate a lot to charities. I give a lot away, and the material trappings, all that stuff. It means nothing to me. It doesn't. Even though I've got it, it doesn't mean anything. It's not where I get my kicks, as it were. So, how I am today and how I was, I almost look back and go, what was that all about? But then the deeper philosophical side of me would say that my past was there for a reason, because it can become your greatest asset if
Oh,
it goes on
yes.
to help someone else. And in my own circumstance, I'm privileged that it does. Tomorrow I'm off to give a motivational talk in London, in Aldgate. I go to university, so I do this stuff, and I do it because it's in tune with my own sort of personal rehabilitation that I'm actively involved in, but also I do try to try to help others or whatever else, but also because I feel like it's my sense of duty, gives me meaning and purpose to my own life, and in some senses I'm paying my debt to the victims I created in the past. Remember, I was an armed robber, I was involved in drug trafficking, all these things. I've harmed a lot of people in the way. So the first half of my life, I made a complete mess of. The second half of my life, I'm determined every day to do something good, to make good. So it's,
And at
yeah.
least that's what's amazing. The world needs so many more people like you, right? I mean,
And they're
the
out
fact
there.
that
They just need to be given a voice.
yes, yes, thank you.
That's why I
Um,
wrote the book.
and I absolutely love that, because your story, like you said, could when people always say, oh, and I was this person, this is the beginning of my journey on in public media. And so, I mean, I've been on the radio on Chasing Prophecy for 9 months, and then my own
Fantastic.
show um, since January. But I was always afraid to, you get in that mindset of disappoint, being bullied again, or what will people think of you if you actually tell the truth about your life and how you've lived, or what will happen if um I guess that's another thing I wanted to ask you. Were you ever afraid, either in prison or once you got out,
Most
of
definitely. I mean, without
repercussions, I guess?
without trying to sound like really bad or whatever else, but this is my past. My truth is my truth. You know, I spent I had some terrible experiences in prison. You know, I've witnessed suicides, all sorts. But you know, for the first part of my long sentence that I got, I was actually sentenced to 13 years in one lump. And after the period where I escaped, after I broke out of court, for the first year, I was kept in such high security conditions. I wasn't allowed no human contact. No, I had to stay in a cell 24 hours a day. They used to let me out 3 times a week
Wow.
for half-hour exercise. I wasn't allowed any human contact because of the method I'd used to escape. What I'd actually done is I'd made a makeshift hypodermic needle out of a pen, like a big biro. I put a paper clip in the end and I filled it with blackcurrant jam so it looked like blood. I know it sounds terrible, and I held it to a prison officer's neck and forced them to open all the doors in the court that I was in that day. They'd taken me from prison to court, and I escaped. But because of the extreme method I'd used, and they didn't know what it was, for all they knew, it could have been AIDS or anything. So
Right.
I wasn't allowed any human contact for a year. I was kept in the most harshest conditions, and then
Wow. I
after
could
I
not
was
imagine.
Well, after I was allowed out of that, what happened is for me, I was a Category A prisoner, which is like the highest security you can get, and I was transferred to a maximum security prison in Britain, where there's only 5 in this country. We have 100 prisons, but there's only 5 maximum security prisons, male prisons, and I spent quite a lot of time in one of them. And then because of the behavioural problems I had, and at this time, you know, I like to say I was untreated for my behavioural problems or whatever else. You know, I was that close to going to a psychiatric hospital called Broadmoor, which I don't know if you know. Broadmoor is a place here. It's like the end of the road. When you go there, you don't have a
Okay.
release date, and you
I've
can
I've
be there
heard
for
of
the
it.
rest
I've
of
not.
your life. Yeah, you could be there for the rest of your life. It's where don't know if you've heard of the Cray twins. It's where Ronnie Cray ended up, and he was never released. He died there. And most people who go there, you will die there because it's like you're considered criminally insane. And for me,
Okay.
I was in segregation unit, which is removed from other prisoners because of the fear of violence. Because I used to have a lot of outbursts. One psychiatrist tapped a pen on the side, and he said, "One signature from me, one signature from him," which was another psychiatrist, and he said, "And you're off to Broadmoor." And I knew that they meant it, you know. And
Wow.
yeah, I was very fortunate. It's like they say, when the student's ready, the teacher will appear. And in my sense, that
Did say
saviour
that.
come in the form of a female prison officer. She was a wonderful
Really?
woman. Yes, she came down the segregation unit, and she had taken a shining to me before on the wing. She could obviously see the good in me that was always there, that was just struggling to get out. And she said to me, "If I get you back on the wing, do you promise to behave?" And I said, "I promise to behave." And she pulled some strings. She got me back onto normal location. I was then able to go, you know what? I'm going to try. I didn't want to let her down. So I started to behave myself on the wing, and I stopped, like, because I used to, you know, it's all in my book. It's all documented that, you know, I used to have a lot of outbursts and attack prison officers and whatever else. And I said, but I'm going to behave because I just didn't want to upset her. And by doing that, then the psychology team started to engage with me and started to say, look, we can help you if you're willing to be helped.
Huh.
And I was then transferred and spent 3 years at a semi-psychiatric prison. But we have one in this country. It's called Grendon Underwood, where they treat people with underlying behavioural problems, personality disorders, all this sort of stuff. And you do a lot of therapy and group therapy. And I went there for 3 years and really looked at myself and really got honest. And, you know, and in the time I was there, you know, I thought, you know what? I'm uneducated, you know, I couldn't string a sentence together. I could barely write a letter. I decided, right, I'm gonna start studying, you know, and I started to do a degree with the Open University, and I went on to get my degree in psychology and whatever else, and and
Wow.
and then decided, right, I'm going to try a new way. I'd done business courses or whatever. Went from there to another prison, finished off, and after being away for like nearly 9 years, when I got out of prison, I said, I'm just going to try a new way. You know, I stayed drug free first and foremost. I don't drink. I'm completely teetotal, and took the risk. Started a business. Learn. I'm still learning, and I learn as I go along, whether and become quite successful. And it was someone that actually said to me, "You need to write your life story." And I thought, well, to write a book was so daunting, And when I wrote my book, I wrote it, and I didn't think I'd ever get it published. And I submitted it to. I was very fortunate. I knew someone who had actually wrote a book, and he submitted it to a publisher. And this publisher actually came back to me and said, "Wow, this needs to go to a major publisher." And I was like blown away. And then the rest is history. I was signed by the largest publishing company in the world, which is Virgin. Virgin Random House is the biggest publishing company in the world. That's Richard Branson.
Yes,
I was
yes, I
signed
saw
by
that.
them, and yeah, they released my
And
autobiography.
and now what year what when was it released? It was uh what year was your book released?
Well, initially it was 2014, but they revised and re-edited because of and it came out recently. It's entitled Outlaw,
Okay.
learning the lessons as Britain's most wanted man, and it's out now. It came
Well,
out
no,
3 weeks
that
ago.
was what my confusion was because I saw that it came out in 2014, but then it was I didn't understand
Re-released,
the
yeah,
okay.
yeah, re-released 3 weeks ago to a wider audience because I didn't have a chance before to sort of do any publicity or anything like that and things I was supposed to do. And then we had the pandemic, which made everything.
Yes.
Obviously, we was in complete lockdown here for 2 years, like no doubt your own country was. It's so yeah. I could just never. So now they wanted to re-release it, and at the moment I'm actually in negotiations with a film company, the
I
BBC here and Channel 4 here. They all want to
that was
buy
my
the
next thing. I was gonna
they all want to
say.
buy the rights to it, because it seems like I've lived this mad life from like an unlicensed boxing champion, an organised crime, to be a successful businessman, to be an author, and it's like I've crammed a lot into my 50 years, as it were. It's like my life has been a bit all over the place, but I mean, in the book, I'm very open about things like mental health and all this sort of stuff. And I think some of the greatest rewards I get today, and again, this doesn't come from an egotistical standpoint, because it was never about money, never being about wanting to be a big I am or all that. So I'm not interested in any of that stuff. I've had messages from people, from young men who say, "I believe I can change my life," and people in prison, that have read the book. I get messages through Facebook and things like that. Wow, if you can do it, I can do it, or whatever. And that gives me a real sense of satisfaction because that helps me make sense of my own life. You can change one person's life, then it's a success, right?
Yes. And that's what I was just thinking, listening to you, you're such an inspiration, not only to me as an adult, but I was like, wow, you should, shoot, you should speak at my son's school or something.
I mean, you can only. I mean, I know people say that I'm quite inspirational. Everything is borrowed. I'm only inspirational because I've been inspired. And like I say, when the student's ready, the teacher will appear. And I'm very fortunate that I don't believe anything happens by accident in this world.
I don't
And
either.
people are placed in your life at the right time. But if you are not switched on, Alfred Hitchcock said it so beautifully. Now, I use quotes because they have a lot of meaning for me. Alfred Hitchcock said, "Every success in life and every opportunity happens by complete accident." He said, "All you can ever be is in the best place emotionally, spiritually, and mentally, should that accident arise." And I
Oh,
think that is such a beautiful saying. We miss so much beauty in the world, and that's
yes.
how it was for me criminally. I missed the beauty of the world because I was so switched off. But when we are switched on, we
Hmm.
start to notice things and we start to see why people are in our lives. And, the wisest amongst us will say, if you want to know where you're at, look at the company you keep. Water finds its own level because the nature of the human condition is we are prevented from seeing how bad our life is at times because it's our way of our own defense mechanisms to keeping us safe. If you
Yes.
if you want to get self-esteem, then you need to do esteemable things. For me, that came in the
Yeah.
form of education. I started to educate myself, and when I started to get my grades and my marks, I was like, wow, it felt good. It was the first time I'd actually done something that I felt good about, you know. And that's how it started for me. It's a process.
It is, and it's it's hard, being patient in those processes. You know, as
Well,
humans,
we
we
want
want
it all now, but
instant
sometimes
results, right?
we want for instant gratification, but sometimes we're not ready for that. You know, we're just not
Absolutely.
ready for that, and it takes time, and we have to mature emotionally to be able to deal with things. It's like with success. I mean, with success comes great maturity and knowing how to deal with it and all that stuff. You know, this is why a lot of these superstars or whatever go completely off the
Mhm.
rails and go bananas. They can't deal with it because they're not emotionally intelligent enough to deal with it.
Well, and I think as adults, we're all kind of in a sense a bunch of broken children,
Very much
regardless
so.
of even if even people who grew up in wealth and such. It's still the world. It's a collective energy that everyone feels. And so
Well, I believe we're all connected. You know, Carl
yeah.
Jung said it beautifully, the collective unconscious. I believe we are all connected at a much deeper
I do
level. I do
too.
believe that.
And I was gonna say, before I forget, one of the things I don't know if you're familiar with. I use a lot of um, when I healed myself from Lyme disease. I use a lot of herbs and stuff and teas. But when you said black currant is what you used, correct? And the syringe at the prison. Did you know that fruit is directly it's linked to the throat chakra? um, you use it to speak your truth, which is
Wow.
symbolic of what you
What I
did,
said, if I
essentially.
can't tell you how I feel, I'll show you. And that's how it was for me.
Yes.
I didn't have the emotional intelligence. And this is the conflict in me, as I believe at heart, I was always quite academic. You know, I was, you know, my friend calls me dumb smart. You know, in life stuff and all that. Sometimes, you
I've
know, I've
been
done
called
some.
that actually.
Yeah, I done some door handles the other day, and I put them on the wrong way round, and I couldn't figure out how to put them on the right way round. You know, I'm dumb smart in certain areas, but in intellectual areas and whatever, I can be quite intelligent. And I think
Yes.
it's addressing the balance sometimes. If the EQ matches the IQ, you're half okay. But with emotional intelligence, it's taught me this much. It's taught me this, and someone who can speak openly about who suffered from some terrible depressions in my life is that it's taught me if I keep the highs a bit lower, it brings the lows a bit higher, and we sort of a bit more balance, you know, because you know you can get some
Good way to
success in
think of
life,
it.
and I've had that recently, and you can sort of run away with that. And I suppose it's okay to have your head in the clouds as long as your feet are firmly on the floor, and that's a great mantra for me, you know, and it's helped me deal
Yes.
with. You know, I've been, and I'm open about this. You know, I'm actually diagnosed as being bipolar, and quite a severe effective uh, uh, on the spectrum. You know, I used to get terrible highs and terrible lows. It's like I used to go into a complete crash, and the crash and the lows were so bad. It was like that was when I was at my most dangerous criminally. You know, I was at my most desperate, and I just didn't care. I didn't care if I died or anything. You know, I was that low. You know, so and having that all the way from childhood, you know, I used to suffer from terrible panic attacks and anxiety, and learning how to deal with that today as an adult and sort of keep things in equilibrium has been very much a massive journey. And it's almost like I embrace it now. Even the depressions, when I get the depressions, I've learned to sort of embrace it and recognize that these things do pass, and you don't have to fall inwards and implode. You can sort of express how you feel. And if you're having a bad day and you need a duvet day, then that's what you need to have, you know. And sometimes, and it's just going with it and forcing yourself to do the things that you don't want to do if you feel depressed, like the simple act of getting up in the morning and making your bed, or
Yes.
having a
That's
shave, or
huge.
having a shower can be a mammoth task, right? If you're suffering from depression, it can be a mammoth task. But if you force
Yes.
yourself to do it, it's almost like you pull yourself out of it. The mind has a way to self heal, you know. And I
It
think I've
does.
learned to embrace the spirit. I think what a lot of people, and I can speak from harsh experience here, a lot of people confuse depression and when they get depressed or everything else, there's another form of depression, and it's called spiritual depression. And if we become spiritually depressed, that's the worst form of depression,
Mm.
the worst form. And I don't want to act like a doctor or anything, and I've got some academic sort of stuff in the psychology department. I'm not a practicing psychologist first and foremost, and I don't profess to be an expert, but what I do profess to be is someone who's suffered from these things my whole life. There's two forms of depression. There's only two: exogenous and endogenous. Exogenous depression is obviously, we can all be prone to that. That's a relationship goes bad, or we're having financial difficulties or whatever. That's the exogenous. The endogenous stuff can be the chemical imbalances, and sometimes we need medicating for that. We need professional help. And that's the hardest thing to do sometimes, because when you're depressed, you see it as a form of weakness. And if anyone who is suffering from depression relates to this, when I was at some of my lowest points, the hardest things for me to do would be to ask for help. And the most simple act is sometimes just a simple show of loving kindness. When someone can't say how they feel and they can't reach out, put your arm around them, show them a bit of
Yes.
love, buy them a bunch of flowers, just let them know you're there. And you don't even have to talk. You just have to listen. You just have to listen. And I've learned that. What sort of what works and doesn't work. No one likes being preached at, do they?
No.
No
No.
one likes being preached at. That's the point I'm trying to make. And I think when I've assisted some people recently who go through depression now, because I do some stuff in that area which I won't go into. I sit with them and just let them know they're not alone. I don't preach at them, and I don't tell them you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do that, because that's the worst thing you can tell to someone who believes they're incapable of doing anything. Just be with them, let them know they're not alone. You know.
I think, and like you were saying, which I agree with, that everything happens for a reason. It's interesting that what you just mentioned, because I live very near, and this came up in my life a few years ago when I started on all of this journey. Um, when I had another near death experience, and I don't know, I got an ad in the mail or something about prison ministries. That was a worldwide organization, and um, back then, I was healing myself, and I didn't have the capacity to be involved in that. And then everything, that you're meant to do, that's meant for you, always comes back around. So when I moved, I actually live very near a prison ministries church, which is interesting because I'm not completely for um organized religion, in a sense, because of the way that churches made me feel in
Mm,
my own path exploring. But this one's very different. It's not even about specific religions. It's about spirituality, and it's about
mm.
uh self-love and self-forgiveness that they're teaching. So it doesn't matter what denomination these prisoners are from,
It
or
doesn't.
um
Listen, I
yeah.
have my own sort of beliefs in that stuff, and I think the worst thing you can ever do is try and impose your belief system on someone else. Let them
Yes,
find their own, and
absolutely.
I take bits from everything, and I wouldn't want to cause any offence to anyone of any religious denomination in any sense or form. But the one quote I love is what Jesus Christ said to St. Peter. He said, Peter, upon you I built my church. And if you think about what he meant by that statement, is I feel that what he actually meant was your church is in you. And at the
Yes.
end of the day, it doesn't matter what religious denomination you are a part of. He was against organized religious himself, right? Jesus Christ was totally against it, totally against it.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I'm a Christian or whatever, I'm not saying that, but I do believe in aspects of the Bible, and I do believe Jesus to be who he said he was, but I'm not going to preach
Oh,
that
I
on
do too.
anyone. But and what I think he meant by that is it's not about practicing faith. It's not about just going to church and praying and worship. It's about your relationship
Yeah.
with a God of your own understanding. And that God is within each and every single one of us. And we're all on our own path and our own journey. And I believe that's the purpose to life. You know, we come in this world, and it's about how much of a relationship we develop with that God of our own understanding by the time we leave this world. And I think that's what this life is about. No matter what mistakes we made, I don't believe anybody's beyond redemption. Nobody. And I think we can all find the path and we can all find it. You know, I mean, faith is an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing, you know, if worked correctly, and a faith that can't be tested, can't be trusted, right? You know, and for me, it's been that way. And I witnessed someone last year go to their death with throat cancer, and you know, on their deathbed, they was almost they was smiling and they was happy and they was free, and they was embracing it. They wasn't in the slightest bit bothered because their faith was that strong in their own God of their own understanding. And they was not of a religious denomination. They had just gone through life and found a deep understanding of a God of their own understanding. And I can only say how it's been for me in the life I've lived, and in some of the terrible dark holes I've been in life. I've always felt like there was something watching over me, something, a force of good, and I don't know what that is, and I don't choose to label it or name it, because I believe the more you try to explain it, the more you're still searching. You don't need
Yes.
to explain it. You've either got it or you haven't. You can't transmit what you haven't got. And the wisest and most spiritual and religious people or whatever in the world, you know, they just have that aura about them. You can see it. You can see that they've got something special. They found something, and their path has led them to where they need to be. The Buddhists would call it enlightenment. The religious would call it a deep. The Christians would call it a deep faith. I suppose it would be the same for the Muslims and every other denomination, and the Hindus as well. Who's right? Who's wrong?
Right. And it's the same for me, I realized that at a very young age as a medium, because communicating with spirits, everybody's always looking for proof of that, proof of ghosts, proof of UFOs, but we waste so much time looking for the proof when
Well,
there's
I'll
been
tell you
proof.
about that. No, I'll tell you about that. You know, and I believe strongly in that. I believe strongly because I've had two encounters in life. Two
Really?
encounters in life. Oh, two encounters that cannot be disputed. That just cannot be disputed. You know, remember I said
Yeah.
I felt like there was a dark force driving me as a young
Hmm.
man or whatever else.
Yeah.
When I was a child, my mum used to come into my bedroom sometimes, and she used to say, she could smell roses. There used to be a really strong smell of roses. And one night I was about 8 or 9 years old, and I woke up in bed, and I just knew there was someone standing beside my bed. And I had bunk beds at the time. I slept in the bottom, my brother slept in the top. And I turned round, and there was a white figure, as clear as day, standing beside my bed. You know, I never saw its face, but because he was looking over my brother. But it was an apparition, just as you see a ghost.
Mm.
It was an apparition, and it was not long after my granddad had died, who from New York, the one that had come over. It was in 19, so it would have been 1979, 1980, and I saw it standing crystal clear. And then about 2 years after that, I was having a row with my sister one day in my mum's house. I was having an argument with my mum, with my sister, sorry. And I've heard a voice, like a growling voice, come from upstairs and said, "Go on, Ray." Crystal clear, crystal clear.
Yeah.
And I will go on to tell you this. I actually have a photo of that spirit.
Really?
I have one of the most amazing ghost photos you would ever see in your life. I have a photo at my mum's. I'm sitting there with my young child like that.
Huh.
And in the background, in the window, there is a picture as clear as day of a demonic face.
Wow.
As clear as day, it's a demonic face, and you can see it behind me. And I'll get the picture. I'll email it through to you. You will see it clear as day. It's a
I
demonic face in the
huh.
window looking in.
So
Yeah.
I
And
have
another
one.
experience I had at that same time. This is freaky. My mum used to live by an old church, and I was coming home one night, and I was about 12 years old, and I was running up the hill, like as you do as a young man, like running. and I felt an overwhelming urge to stop. And I stopped and I looked down, and there was a chair, just an empty chair sitting in front of me on the pavement, like an old leather chair. And I looked at the chair, and the chair went completely, so I've had these experiences as a young man, so I don't know if and I do get premonitions and things, so although I don't understand it and I don't profess to, I've had so many experiences in
Do
my own
you
life.
do you meditate?
I used to, I actually got involved in Theravada Buddhism for
Really?
7 years when I was in prison, and I used to meditate, and a lot of my spirituality comes from teachings from, like I say, I take bits from everything. And the actual monk that used to come and see me was he's actually quite a famous monk. His name's Ajahn Kimadamo, and he used to come and see me, and I used to see him every week. And I did used to meditate to try and still my mind and quieten me down and whatever. But I have one of them
Huh.
minds that's just constantly, it's like a washing machine. I found it
I do
very, very
too.
difficult. And for
Yes.
me, my form of meditation was I'd go in the boxing gym and skip, or
Well,
go on the
that's what I
bag.
was
And I
gonna
found,
say. Yeah. There's multiple ways to meditate, especially for people with ADHD like us. I can't
mm,
just sit in one place and be still, for and think because I'll go crazy.
yeah,
So
I get it
so
because my mind's like that. Yeah.
yeah, so I would when I my meditation would be during the shutdown. I'd go to the school. There was a school near me that I'd go to the track, where I would go to the gym, same thing. And
Yeah.
that was my form of meditation.
Well,
Um
the other night time, I always sleep with earphones in. I know that sounds mad, but it's. I think I suffer from a form of PTSD because in prison you become so accustomed to noise. Prisons are very noisy places. There's no quiet time even throughout the night, and in some of the environments I've been in, you get mentally ill people. They're shouting out the window all night and whatever else. And
Oh, that's like
I
the
find
ghetto.
noise comforting. I don't like silence. It's quite weird,
Yes.
so I tend to put something on and I listen to. I've got a thing. I like the universe, and I listen to different lecturers and things on the universe and whatever. I
Those are
love it.
very healing,
It
frequencies.
is.
Everything has sound, yeah. And that's another thing. I was gonna say, we spoke with Jerry Sargent from the UK last last week, week before
I meant to listen, but we went away for the weekend.
last,
We
our
went, so I didn't get a
backgrounds.
chance.
Um,
I've not heard of him, but like I
yeah,
say, the UK is a
he
big place.
yes. Yeah, I'll have to send you his information as well. He grew up in a, life of crime and selling drugs and things like that. So he has very interesting story, very doing great things now. Um, that's one. And then I was going to ask, so my next topic tonight, which I would love for you to stick around and give input on it. Before that, where can people find? Uh, do you have? I couldn't find. You don't have a website per se, like an
No, I
actual.
don't. I'm on Facebook as Ray Bishop.
Mhm.
You can get my book on Amazon or the internet, anywhere like that. It's just if you type in my name, Ray Bishop Outlaw, no doubt it'll come up. I know you can get it on Amazon and places like that, And what I will say is, all proceeds from that book go to charity. I don't get a penny from it,
Wow.
I didn't want the money. It was never about the money. I donate it to the Change Your Life, Put Down Your Knife campaign. I actually sponsor and pay the rent for two boxing clubs in the UK that help young
Wow.
people, and we don't charge them. We don't charge them. They go,
Yes.
so they come from impoverished backgrounds, and it's not just about the boxing. There's counselling, people who go there to counsel them and whatever else, and I pay the rent to that, and yeah, so I do things like that, and any money that I raise out the book or anything like that, the money just go there. It's never about the money. It's
That's
not.
amazing.
Yeah, I don't want to earn any money off it or anything like that. So I'm not profiteering out of my past and my criminality, as it were.
Boxing clubs, that's a really good idea because people always say, well, why don't the kids in the ghetto play sports? Why don't they play instruments? Why don't they do this? Because it is so expensive to, my daughter was in gymnastics this summer and loved it, but I was paying, I don't know, like 200-300 a month, and
It
I couldn't
saddens me.
sustain that. I couldn't
But you know
sustain
what
that.
saddens me, and I say this from how we opened our argument about prison and some of the talent you see wasted. Some of the best sports stars and best
Yes.
artists and best musicians, they'll never realize their potential because they don't have them same opportunities. It's like the
Yes.
acting world. It's full of mainly the privileged people who don't have to
Yeah.
work and afford to go to drama schools and whatever else. And it's very much the same with the tennis and all these sports. If you haven't got the means and the funds to you're never gonna you're never going to get there, are you? It's so sad. It's so sad because there's some real talent, and I witnessed that in boxing clubs. That
Mhm.
some of the real
Yeah.
talented people, and they just don't have the means or the backing, the financial backing to progress to where they perhaps could. It's sad. It is sad.
I think plus the stigma behind it of everyone telling them that they can't, you know,
There is that. There is this.
even the teachers and the community and oh well maybe you should focus on doing this before you dream that big. Maybe you should, I mean, and it's a cycle.
Well, I
And
think, Peter, I think I wasn't really exposed to a lot as a child. And I think if the more things you can expose a child to, they will find their potential somewhere. I mean, everyone has got a talent. Everyone.
mhm,
Every
yes,
person alive has got a talent, but
we
not
were
everyone
all put
finds
here
it.
for a purpose. Yes.
100%. Everyone's got a talent.
And every time I go home to my parents, my mom has had this newspaper clipping on her refrigerator for as long as I can remember, and it always reminds me because it says, "It's never too late to become who you might have been,"
Never.
and it's never too late.
Never.
I
And
don't care.
that doesn't always mean financial. We
No,
come into
no.
this world with nothing and we leave with nothing.
Yes.
It doesn't always mean financial. I think we're geared in society now that everyone confuses success, sorry, with financial means and how many
Mm-mm.
toys we got. I think it's about being happy. I think it's about being
Yes.
productive. I think it's about being somebody that people want to pick up the phone and say, "Are you okay?" and "How are you?" and having that connectivity. I think success is in who we can count in our pool as friends and all that stuff. It's not about financial. It really isn't. That stuff doesn't make us happy, and it certainly doesn't make us better than
No.
anyone else. It really
I always
doesn't.
say that. The poorest, some of the poorest people in the world have the biggest bank accounts. Um,
Some of the poorest people in the world, all they have is money.
yes, yes.
And that is very much the case, very much the case. And if it's not, I think the real problems in society is poverty. It's the insatiable appetite of the rich and wealthy.
Mhm.
If you took the greed out of society, there's plenty to go around. There's enough land, there's enough food, there's enough money. But it's the insatiable appetite of the rich and elite, and it's always the person at the top telling the person at the bottom that they need to take less.
Yes.
And it's the wrong way round. It's the wrong way round.
I was I thought about this when my son was in football because their school didn't have the funding to have a new field or anything, and they didn't even have enough players at the beginning of the season. They actually they didn't think they were going to be able to have a team, so they actually brought kids from the soccer team to which I guess overseas it's different. You all do call soccer football, but in the US actual football, they brought kids from the soccer team to be on the football who had never played football before in their lives. I mean, kind of same concept. But so nobody, and this school hadn't done anything with their team in 14 years, 15 years, which is how old the kids were that are on that team. And so their games were amazing, because I've been to uh, schools that had more funding and more money, and those kids who had wealthier parents who had been playing football since they were 5, had professional training and all this stuff. And to see, if I had a choice, I would have chosen the football in the ghetto because they didn't have a nice field. They had, uh, you know, rocks and dirt holes, and all the kids on the team, they didn't all have matching jerseys because they couldn't afford it. They didn't have the nicest cleats. They didn't have um, you know, all the best helmets and gear. They had what the school could afford or what they could afford.
Yeah.
Maybe hand-me-downs and stuff. And these kids quickly rose. They went to the championship game for the first time the school had been in 15 years. And so seeing them play against other teams, that um, were were wealthier, and they had the egos and the um, overconfidence and stuff like that, saying, "Oh, this school's not going to do anything. These kids are
Yeah.
just losers. They're poor. They're whatever." And these kids played their hearts out.
Bless
They were
them.
there for the game, just to play. It wasn't about politics, and it wasn't about whose parents had the right name and whose they they just loved the game. And some of them, that was their escape.
Oh, bless them.
Some of them were going back to uh, an abusive home after practice. Some of them were going back to um, homes with no parents present.
Which is why I'm such an advocate, and why I hate bullying so much, because you
Yeah,
never know what's going on for people at home, and especially with the
absolutely.
youngsters. Kids can be so cruel, and
Oh,
we're quite fortunate because we grew up in an era, without social media and all these things, and now what
yeah.
the youngsters are exposed to now.
Oh,
I mean, I hate it. I see it today, like the young girls nowadays in our country, and I suppose it's the same in your. We see it in Hollywood and all that. They think that beauty is all about outside. Beauty is an inside. Beauty is an
yes.
inside job, and a lot of these girls now they're mutilating themselves with lip fillers and.
Yeah,
And all these sorts of things, and it's really quite sad to see. It's quite sad because beauty is an internal thing. It's an
yeah.
internal
None
thing.
of
It really
that. All
is.
of those things. Like you said, I didn't look my age. Back when I was drinking and when I was partying and doing bad things, and when I'm much younger, I mean, I was in my 20s, you know, I looked probably 10, 15 years older than I do now.
Hmm.
And it's because I didn't respect myself. I didn't love myself. I was
Yeah.
doing, toxic things, hanging around toxic people for that matter. I was in
Yeah.
abusive relationships and all these things. And I looked literally, it got to the point where I looked like I was dying. And the only reason people say that now, they're, "Oh, how do you look?" No, I haven't had, you know, lip injections and all these things.
You don't need to.
Well, but that's the change. It's literally mind over matter. Once you start loving yourself and and you project that not only within but without too. And once you start acting that way, and you know,
Well,
everything
I think
changes.
you become more attractive. You attract a better sort of person, and that's how it's been
Yes.
for me, very much so. When my behaviour changed and all these sort of things, I attracted better people,
Yes.
and the people I have in my life today are fantastic people. I associate with successful businessmen and all
Mhm.
these sorts of. And other wonderful people that are doing good in society, and it's not just I don't just mix with the wealthy. It doesn't matter to me whether you got £1 or £1,000,000. It makes no difference to me. If you're a good person, I'm attracted to you, and that's the same as it is for me. And that's how I sort of. It was a process of getting out of crime and criminality. It's because I value myself enough today to not put myself in that mix. I don't think criminally today. I don't associate with criminals, and I don't. I have no desire to, because I have enough self belief, self value, and my life is worth more today than to put myself in that position. That's how it's been, and that's how it is, and continues to be, and that's a great way to be.
Yes.
That's how I'm happy,
Yes.
whatever that is.
Absolutely.
you
I
know,
think I think you get to a point where you just say, you can't you can't live that way anymore. You can't um and for me it was literally my doctors told me, I had like 1% chance to live.
wow.
So they
Oh,
said
so you've been through it. Yeah, you've
they
been
said you
through it.
either make it or you don't, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had so many people um I can't even count the number of times I've had guns held to, knives held to my throat. I've been in fights.
Mm.
I've been in I've had I had a huge scar, concussion. I was hit in the head with a beer bottle once. Like I've you know, there's a lot of things, and but I don't think of it now from a victim standpoint, I guess, because I believe that things happen for you, not to you.
Well, we are only ever victims of ourselves, and that's not to
Yes.
be flippant on anyone who's been on the receiving end of violence or anything like that, because but we are victims of ourselves. It's about our reaction to it, bringing it back that everything happens for a reason. I mean, some of the hardest and toughest things I've been through in life have made me the man I am today. And the
Yeah.
greatest gift I've got today as a human being is empathy. I've learned to empathize, and that means I've
Yes.
learned to never judge someone till you've walked a mile in their shoes. And now I can put myself in someone else's position and sort of like reach out the hand and say, I know what it's like in that hole because I've been in there myself. And that's
Yes.
empathy is a fantastic, I mean, that's one of the most beautiful human traits. And not everyone's got it. We live in a society
No.
that is so
No.
unempathetic.
Yes.
Only
That's
2% of the world probably has true empathy.
and the reason that the others do, like you said, and it does come off as I'm so similar to you in that aspect because people say, well, Trish, you've experienced all these things, and I'm like, well, that's why I can relate, because when I'm talking about something that addictions or whatever it might be, fights or whatever, it's not because I'm being judgmental. It's more of a ask me how I know,
Mm,
ask me because I've paid that price,
yeah.
um, you know, and so it changes your entire perspective, I guess, on the world.
Well, it teaches you to be, I think for me, to be less selfish. Selfish destroys more people than
Yes,
anything. It's selfishness
and power
destroys
and
more
even
people
power.
than anything, because in amongst all that, we lose ourselves and we care about ourselves. And I think to become selfless doesn't mean we don't think about ourselves. We just think of ourselves less and think about what
Yes,
we can contribute. If for someone like me who lived a criminal life, who was an organised criminal, I mean, if you read about me, I've been labelled a gangster and all these things, ex-gangster. And I don't like these terms. These are terms people have used about me in the past. But at the end of the day, I was just a selfish human being. A selfish human being. That is what I was. And today I'm not. I'm a lot more selfless. It doesn't. I'm really not that important. It's what I can put into the world, and that's more important.
I don't think that's true. I think everyone's important. I think, um, it's more. I know with myself at some point, um, I stopped caring. Wh- Somebody's always going to have something to say about somebody else, whether it's true or not. And that's usually a projection of how they feel about themselves,
Mm.
um, 100%. And so it's really how you label yourself, I think.
Most definitely. I mean,
Um,
when I say I'm not important, I mean we're not always as important as we think we are. We're not the center of the universe. That's
oh,
that's what I
oh,
mean by that. Where, like,
absolutely.
with the
Yes.
world doesn't evolve around us. I think that's what I mean by it.
Yeah.
Uh, it's like you know,
Well,
we're all
humans in
we're all
general think
unique.
that.
Yeah, we're all unique and we're all irreplaceable and we're all
Yes.
perfect, warts and faults. We're exactly as we are meant to be. And self-acceptance is the key to the greatest freedom. If once we accept ourselves, we can truly accept others. Until we accept ourselves, we cannot accept others. We're
No.
incapable of all them things in life which always, for me, seem unattainable. Healthy relationships and all these things were all unobtainable to me because I was so self-absorbed and I just couldn't accept myself. How can you truly accept love if you can't love yourself? How can you give love if you can't love yourself? And it's
Absolutely.
all that healing stuff. We see it all the time, don't we? People have a relationship, it goes bad, they jump straight into another one and they take all the baggage of that one into that one. They never deal with anything. They just jump from
Yes.
ship to ship to ship and wonder why the end result's always the same, because nothing changes, right?
Yeah. You have to be able to deal with your shadow side of everything. Um,
Yeah, and accept that there are parts to all of us that if we could that may not seem perfect, but they are. They're how they're meant to be. As long as we're not
Yes.
harming people, as long as we're not harming people, and most importantly, as long as we're not harming ourselves, because that's what we do in the end. If we go through life
Hmm.
resentful and we resent everyone, all that truly happens is we're harming ourselves, because that will turn to self-resentment, and I know that, and you end up harming yourself.
Yes. And
You
that's the
end up
same
harming
with
yourself.
the inability to forgive as well. When not just other people, but yourself. You're absolutely right.
You
When we don't
have to
forgive
forgive
ourselves,
yourself. We have to
um,
forgive ourselves.
yes.
And that's the thing, is like a lot of people would they want everyone to forgive them, but they can't forgive anyone else, because you haven't forgiven yourself for the harms you've caused yourself. And no matter what life we've lived, we've all harmed ourselves in some way.
Hmm.
Be it, I'm an extreme example, be it the crime, criminality, addiction, that stuff. But we've all harmed ourselves.
But it's the same addictions. Everybody has addictions. I don't care. There's
Yeah,
some degrees that are worse than others, whether it's
yeah,
it's substances or whatever. But self hatred is an addiction.
most definitely.
If too much social media is an addiction too, which can become negative.
Yeah.
Um, I there's so many addictions that
Oh,
people sit there judging others, saying, "Oh, well, they're addicted to drugs, or they're addicted to alcohol or sex or whatever it may be." But there's other addictions that are just as bad.
yeah,
And an addiction's an addiction. From the time we're young, I even if you think about it, like sugar being an addiction, which is
yeah.
a huge health problem in this world now, comes from who? Our ourselves, like our parents, or whoever gives us sugar, our teachers, or whoever gives us sugar the first time, because it's not something that kids are born needing or even know exists. So,
Yeah, yeah. Eating disorders and all these things. I mean,
mhm,
they're becoming um, so predominant now, especially
yes,
amongst young girls. Eating disorders, and it's really, really
yes,
sad. And I think it's because of what the images that they're portrayed
yeah,
on the TV and everything. They think, oh, if you're not slim, you're not beautiful.
yeah,
And
and
it's
that's
it's wrong. It's so wrong.
it is. My daughter's 8, and um, she came home from school one day and she said, "I think I'm fat," and she's not at all. And I'm like, that is not something I could relate to,
Oh,
because when I was 8 years old, I didn't care about I half the time I didn't care what clothes I didn't care about brands, I didn't care about fashion that much. I was out running around on the playground skinning my knees and stuff at 8 years old. I wasn't worried about my weight.
it's like these are
So,
these are problems now. The more that children, and especially young people, impressionable people, are exposed to, it's just it's wrong. It's
it
so
is.
wrong. I mean, I've got a 12-year-old stepdaughter. She's like a pencil, and someone called her fat one day, and she broke her heart. She was crying, and she wanted to join the gym and all that. And I mean, this is not healthy for a 12-year-old child to be worrying about their weight. It's you are what you are. It's. I mean, I'm not saying I'm not an advocate of saying, "Oh, we'll just eat unhealthy or whatever." I'm not
No,
saying
no,
that. But
right.
what I'm saying is, some people are slightly bigger, some people, and we're all beautiful in our own way.
Yes.
We're all beautiful in
Imperfectly
our own way.
perfect.
Of course. Of course.
I my that's one of the things that it it also has to start with adults, helping reinforce that change, because we're just as bad. You overhear people everywhere in the grocery store, in this, markets and buses and everything else, um, talking so negatively about other people. And
Yeah.
I was just as guilty, uh, years ago when I first started this whole journey of trying to be more mindful of my thoughts and my actions. I started each day. I was like, okay, I'm going to see how many times in a day. First of all, I have a negative thought. I started with that. And then I would go to like a mall or a park or something with my dog or kids or whatever, and I would be consciously aware of how many times I looked at another person in public, um, that I didn't know, they're just doing their own thing, and judged them,
Mm,
and whether that was negative or positive, and if it was negative, how did that reflect upon myself? And I would try to instantly, I'm like, okay, well, instead of judging or thinking something negative, how about I find something positive
mm,
to say about them in my own head? And then it got to, I'm going to say something positive to a stranger, which was hard for an introvert, um, as many times as I actually think it, because I wanted to be authentic about it. It's not like I was making these things up, but I'm like, that's odd in our generation that we we have anxiety about telling someone something good about themselves. You
mm,
know, that doesn't, but we're quick to tell them something bad about, point out something bad. That doesn't make any sense.
yeah.
Um,
I think
it
that's
just,
that anxiety comes from the to say something good about someone because we find it so hard to actually say that to ourselves. Affirmation is a very powerful tool, and if
yes,
you tell yourself something enough times, you'll start to believe it. And if every
absolutely.
thought and everything you tell yourself is negative, you are as you say you are. That is what
Hmm.
they say, isn't it?
Yes,
And you start to believe that, and it is all the inner conflicts with the ego. The human nature is we like to stand on people's heads to make ourselves feel taller, and that is human nature in a nutshell. And this is all the problems in the world can be attributed to that. I often say, a lot of these politicians and the Donald Trumps of this world and the Putins and all these people and whatever else. I sometimes say I wish the world was run by women because they're more organised and they're less prone to have that male ego and whatever else, and to be like my to not sound rude, my feet are bigger than your feet syndrome, as you know it's all ego. Everything's all
yes.
attributed to ego, you know.
And it's but the difference I noticed after improving the way I talk to myself, because I felt invisible for a very long time. Um, because I've always been kind to other people, for the most part. Um, but I felt like I was literally disappearing in the world, and nobody ever
Mm,
noticed me anywhere as far as that went. And then when I started talking differently to myself, it was crazy, the difference, just in public. Strangers would come up to me and say very nice things. I mean, even if it was something little, it made the biggest difference. It,
of
it
course it
quite
does.
literally changed my life.
Well,
They
that's
could
the
have said something about, I don't know, my bag or my shoes or something, which I might not have even paid attention to.
Well, this is the
Um,
greatest illusion and the greatest misconception is when people actually make the statement, "You made me feel." No one can make us feel
no,
anything. It's our
no,
reaction to it, and it's about where we are at in ourselves.
yes,
If somebody with a real low self-esteem, for example, would get dressed to go out, for example, if 99 people said you look absolutely amazing and one person said you look, no, that doesn't suit you, you're going to go with that fault. That's the
yes,
reality. So no one can
yes,
make us feel anything. It's our response to it. And I will say this, and this is when I knew how damaged I was as a human being. Part of the therapeutic process I had when I was in that institution that I spoke about, one of the exercises they gave us to do, they said, right, you need to look in the mirror and look yourself in the eye and tell yourself, I love you. And that is so uncomfortable for someone with a low self-esteem to
it
make
is.
eye contact with yourself. It is so uncomfortable. And to bridge that gap is another one, which is an exercise I had to do. But if you do it long enough, eventually you start to believe it and you can look yourself in the eye. And if you can look yourself in the eye, you can look the world in the eye. And another tool that they
Yes.
got us to do is they taught us to get a pillow and we had to sit in a chair and they'd say, right, what you've got to do is take that pillow and that's you as a baby and I want you to
Oh,
show it some love. Do
oh
you know
my
how
goodness.
difficult that was? Do you know how difficult that was,
I
especially for me? And I was somebody who'd endured some which I don't go into, some quite a harrowing childhood. There was quite a lot of physical neglect and abuse, because I had a violent alcoholic father and whatever else, which is, I won't go into too much, but for me that was so difficult, and I broke down in tears. And I was one of them people who just couldn't cry, and I could never cry. And when I held this pillow and it represented me as a babe, I broke down in tears and I couldn't go near it. And that's when I actually started to realise and recognise how much a divide there was in me. From as a child, I'd completely just switched off, just
Yes.
completely switched off, because it was my only way of coping, and almost become an adult at 5 or 6 years old. You know, as a child, I never had toys. I was never interested in toys. I never played with toys, but I never had them anyway. But I was just, there was just no childhood. I just totally disconnected and just gone into this world and felt like I'd been dropped from a spaceship. And it's taken time, and it's an ongoing process for me to recognize that the only person who can care for that pillow is me. And we search for, if you don't make that connection and make that bond, you will go through life asleep, and you will look for love in all the wrong places, and you will be attracted to all the traits in somebody else that you
Yeah.
do not possess yourself. And it
Yes.
leads to one place, and that's unhappiness,
Mhm.
abuse. It reinforces all them negative beliefs you already have about yourself, in terms of, I'm not worth it, I'm not as good as the next person, all that. It just reinforces that. And all we are doing is looking for negative reinforcement. Once we can build them bridges, we start to look for positive reinforcement, and we look for better people, and we attract better people. And them situations we have placed ourselves in the past, we value ourselves too much to do it today. That's why I don't associate with criminals. That's why I don't associate with drug users and people like that. It's not that I judge them. It's just
Right.
that I value myself today enough to know that it's down to me to protect myself. These things in my past have been far more powerful than I ever was. You know, drugs and all these things, they're more powerful than I ever was, so I don't put myself in that position. Why would I?
That's you have, Ray, you have such an amazing story. And they say, it's the five people we surround ourselves with, um, who we become.
Well, there's
And
only this is another trait for anyone who's listening, anyone who wants to, who really wants to get a deep understanding. Do you know there's only 5 personality traits? There's only 5. We all got our own characteristics and everything, but there's only 5, and that's the thinker, the feeler, the doer, the belonger, and the I forget what the bloody other one is in now. But anyway, you will only never know your dominant personality trait under crisis. Like when if the house was on fire, a thinker will sit there and go, let me figure out a way to get out. A feeler will go into a panic. A doer will just jump out the window. A belonger will just try to latch onto someone else, and the helper will want to help everyone. There's 5 dominant personality traits, and it's recognizing what we are and working with that.
I I think they should teach that in school. I've heard of that, and I think in the US it's a different way in psychology, but it's the same concept. Um, but Ray, we are out of time, unfortunately. I would love to continue speaking with you.
It's been
I'm
an
going to email
absolute
you.
pleasure.
It has
I've really
been
enjoyed
such
it.
a pleasure. Me too. I was going to say in closing, um, you said bridging that gap a few times. I was wearing a Gap sweater thing that I had. And when I heard that Naomi Judd had passed away on Saturday, actually, and it's ironic because she, if you're not familiar with the song, look it up. Her and her daughter sang Love Can Build a Bridge. And it's a powerful song and a powerful statement. Um, and, you know, our condolences go out to her family and
Most
and
definitely.
friends because she did die of mental illness after all of her struggles through life. So um, thank you all for listening, Ray. Thank you again. And
Thank you. It's been an absolute honour. And I reiterate, please, good people of Kansas, please stay safe.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, it's not thundering now, so maybe the storm's calmed down. And we will see you all next, or well, I guess see you. We will be back next week. Tune into The Missing Piece another 2 hours from 8 to 10 o'clock p.m. Central Time. Have a good night and stay safe.
Thank you, Trish.
Oh, maybe.